All right, so if you're considering upgrading your roofing system, maybe you're considering a composite roofing material. In this video, we're going to be covering Brava Roof Tile and go into all the different factors and features that go into it and to see if it makes sense for you. So today in the studio, I figured why not? We'll have the manufacturer themselves to talk about Brava Roof instead of hearing it from us. So Gavin, appreciate you hanging out with us and telling us about Brava.
Yeah, no, thank you for the invitation, Ben. So, pretty excited to just kind of touch on some general things and kind of let everybody know kind of what Bravo's about. Maybe it may or may not be a fit for them, and kind of how it can be a benefit for them and kind of help them within their home. Not only curb appeal, but some other benefits that come with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say for people who have never heard of Brava Roof Tile, or maybe they've really not even familiar with like synthetic or composite roofing material, tell us a little bit about the company and like what is Brava Roof Tile?
Yeah, so Brava Roof Tiles has been in company since 2008, so we've been around since then. Pretty length, period of time, for composites especially. Manufactured right now currently in Washington, Iowa, so a little bit ways away for anybody that is from the Midwest, or those that may not be. Caitlin Clark fans, WNBA, that's where she's from.
Yeah.
So we do have a second manufacturing plant coming on board. It's going to be in the southeast, kind of near the Georgia area. So going to be able to help service the Southeast specifically, considering it is one of our larger markets. A lot of demand just with, the harsh weather and, the different things in nature that does happen down here. So pretty excited for that and being able to better service our contractors and homeowners as well.
Nice. Okay, so you guys started in 2008, and I'd say for me, I had never heard of Brava, or I'd never heard of I didn't even know synthetic roofing like was a thing until I'd joined Swordsman. So for people who aren't familiar, I mean, I'm sure they've heard of like, you have your tile roofs and things like that, but Brava looks like tile, looks like slate and things like that, but like what actually is it? Tell us a little bit about the product.
Yeah, so we manufacture three different profiles. We manufacture Spanish barrel profile, a cedar shake profile, and then a slate profile, which is actually right here behind us,
Yeah.
kind of showcased here in our slate single width specifically with the Washington color. Predominantly, it's around 85% recycled industrial grade plastics. So, not the consumer grade plastics. You're going to be thinking anything that's pre landfill and pretty heavy duty. Let's say, like Pepsi pallets or maybe, like picnic tables, like things that have to qualify in terms of that industrial grade. And something I like to tell people too is plastics, gets people in the head. You think of all the, cheap stuff that, is really just not made to a high quality standard. Well, one, we do have to meet that industrial grade standard, but two, we have a science team in our plant that actually tests all the goods coming in and then all the goods that leaves in terms of the finished goods when it's colored and actually goes through our compression molded manufacturing process. So there's a couple different ways you can be manufacturing when it comes to composites, and we're pretty unique in that compression molded instance. And a little bit slower process, but we feel like we get a little bit higher quality control. It doesn't melt the plastics. It kind of turns into like a hot Play-Doh essentially.
Okay.
And we use mineral pigmentation to do all of our coloring, which kind of helps us withstand a lot of the harsh heat and storms and things of that nature that happen down here within Florida specifically. We're in other areas outside of Florida. I mean, the Caribbean, mountainous areas like Colorado and Montana. So our team in terms of quality control and things of that nature are pretty good with that, and we want to make sure that we have a high quality product, being able to get offered, one, for you guys as contractors to be able to offer it to the homeowners and making sure that the homeowners are happy, with the product that's going to last them a lot longer and give them a lot less headaches and make the house, look to their standard, or maybe they have a specific look and they want to just lift that curb appeal and give that home its true natural beauty, or kind of, its showcase, so to speak, sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have made out of recycled materials, and I want to touch on the aesthetics part of everything. So you mentioned like the coloring and the dyeing process and things like that. So people who already have some type of tile home, whether it's concrete or clay, and they let's say they have a higher end home, and the look of things is very important to them, obviously. So are we limited on different colors? Or you guys have like a ton, right? Like nearly 100.
Yeah, so I mean, really, our color span is unlimited. I mean, we can do custom colors, but when it comes to like our standard color offering, we have 13 different colors for our Spanish and 12 for our slate and shake. So, I mean, really, with a lot of your standard colors, like for instance, this is a standard color in terms of behind us, the Washington. It's a pretty popular color. We try to stay in the realm of what the popular kind of things would be with our slates, your darker colors, your blacks, your grays, maybe a little bit of hint of, some browns and purples and greenish hues. When it comes to the cedar shake, we try to stick within those lifelines of, new cedar, which we actually have. It looks like it's straight out the lumber yard. And then we have all the way to aged cedar or lake forest, depending on if you have salinity in the air. And then with your Spanish tiles, antique, Tuscan clay, aged mission, we have some colors that's a color blend. So rather than it just being one solid color, which we do have some of those, there's some that kind of almost look like concrete or clay, maybe 5, 10, 15 years old, because people want to get that weathered look,
Yeah.
but they don't want to have to deal with pressure washing or the HOA or things of that nature. People complaining that the roof looks dirty because it is, but some people just like that look. So we have that option as well. But yeah, if somebody want to do a custom color, we can do that. That's just because of our mineral pigments. So, somebody wants a color and, 5 years down the road, they want it again, we can go ahead and make it again. We'll never discontinue a color, which happens a lot with concrete and clay tiles. It's a big issue for a lot of contractors and homeowners. You get kind of that spotted look on the roof, and there's faded tiles and new tiles, and it's just not, it's an eyesore sometimes to some people. So yeah, it's kind of gives us, our uniqueness and our flexibility as well.
And you guys have a good color warranty as well. So most people, I'd imagine, with plastic, let's say, or if they're speaking it in a negative way, like, oh, it's going to fade or whatever. Yep. So touch on that a little bit as far as the color warranty.
Yeah. So we cover up to 400 units within our 50-year limited lifetime warranty. 400 units, just to kind of be somewhat relative, you can't really tell with your naked eye. If for some reason one of our roofs is faded, that would definitely be past the 400 units, and our warranty would kick in. You just kind of measure it, to see what that 100 unit level would be if there was any level of fadeness. But we're so much of a high standard within that retrospect just because of all the testing I mentioned earlier, with our science team that is there, that has all the machines that do the simulations and, products that we've had around for a long time. So, and the mineral pigments and our compression molding process helps kind of keep us within that standard to be able to offer that. Because, like you mentioned, a lot of plastics, whether it's dyes, for the coloring, or, things that, are made nowadays. You have wicker furniture, it starts to fade and stuff like that. It's not the same sort of thing. So that's why, composite, synthetic, or plastic, it's some things that we're unique to, that we're able to kind of withhold in terms of our quality.
Nice. Okay, cool. And so outside of, I feel like one of the main appeals is Brava is something that aesthetically looks authentic to tile, whether it's the barrel or slate, but the huge benefit is the durability of it. So you have the impact rating and the wind rating. So touch on that for people who aren't aware of how durable these products are.
Yeah, for us, we're Class 4 impact. So granted, there's a lot of Class 4 impact materials. We have a couple things. One of them specifically is we actually have a video that was a sports impact durability. We had a golf player, a hockey player, and a baseball player all shoot, throw, or hit their respective sport into a mimicked kind of wall or roof, you could say. Pretty, standard steep pitch, I should say. And for me, the hockey puck one was making me pretty nervous because I was like, this is guys going to be slap shotting the hockey puck into our tiles, especially the Spanish barrel. The slate and shake, since it's a flat profile, not too much concern, but with a Spanish, curvature and, there being gaps in between those Spanish barrels, it's but he slap shotted it, didn't do any damage or anything like that. And that attests to the Class 4 impact. The Class 4 impact tests a 2-inch steel ball, 20 feet up in the air, not damaging or blemishing the tile. And I even have some contractors who take our Spanish barrel and drive it over with their trucks.
Yeah, I've seen those.
It's pretty crazy because if you do that with any sort of concrete or clay, it's going to be in a million pieces. So it's pretty cool that, we're able to offer that. Granted, it's pretty extreme. If you have a weight of a truck on your roof, I don't think your roof is really there anymore.
Yeah.
But it just gets to showcase that the way when we have, hail or, the large hurricanes that come through, all that flying debris isn't going to be a hazard to the home in terms of the roof, but also, for insurance carriers, they're seeing that this product is very durable. So they're looking at it as, okay, this is something that, is kind of the future of you could say, not the economy, but of the industry, so to speak. And, being able to see that, for one, the industry, or for the insurance companies, it's going to save them some money because they're not going to have flying debris. And for the homeowners, they get to have a nice product that looks good, but is also going to be very durable when it comes to a lot of the storms that we have. And I know you mentioned, with the wind rating, when it comes to Miami-Dade and our wind uplift numbers specifically, for our 3 profiles, we're looking at 196, 202, and 206. In terms of the pressures per square foot. So when you do that formula, it's very rough in terms of miles per hour. You can't really convert it exactly, so to speak, just because there's so many different scenarios that you add in terms of the pitch of the roof, how many floors, how tall is the building, what direction is it facing, northeast, southwest. There's a lot of things that are factored into that, but you're looking at least 200 miles per hour in terms of all those pressures, even, exceeding that. So when it comes to hurricanes, I mean, we have pretty high quality testing, and the wind durability is definitely there, and being able to have, the fasteners and having the high wind installation, things of that nature, and just the product itself is kind of the reasoning why we do a test of those numbers.
Yeah, and I feel like just overall the peace of mind that comes with it, knowing how high of a wind rating it is, it seems like, if it actually does get up that high, like the decking's coming off the house. So
yeah, and that's the
that
thing
point,
that's unfortunate is, I've had this thought cross my mind, and, our product is really good, and hopefully, so to speak, maybe they can start, building houses a little bit better, because there possibly may be other systems of the house that are going to be failing before the Brava technically does fail, but at least for sure, one of the biggest issues a lot of people have is the product that's on top, right? The shingles, the concrete, the clay. You're able to kind of take that worry or that headache away, and as long as the rest of the house is pretty sound, and for the most part they usually are nowadays, then usually minimal to no damage, or at least being able to have a lot less than what people typically have nowadays, for sure.
Nice. And so one thing I don't understand with Brava is, like, how is there zero maintenance? Like, how do you know what I'm saying? Like with concrete tile, that's a huge thing. They get dirty and things like that. And like you mentioned earlier, like with a lot of like historic homes, they like that aged look, like with clay tile and things like that. But for people who don't want that, tell me more about, like, how is there zero maintenance with Brava?
Yeah, so I mean, you can say zero maintenance, little or no maintenance, however you want to word it. When it comes to the Brava material, it's all closed cell. So the biggest advantage of that is it's not going to be absorbing any water or anything like that. The biggest issue with a lot of the other products, concrete and clay, they're all going to absorb water. The biggest thing I tell people is go take a concrete or clay tile and take a Brava Spanish tile, or even a slate or shake, and take like some red wine, maybe some cheap red wine, because you're going to be wasting it. But pour the red wine on the tiles. It's not going to stain the tile. So all that's getting absorbed, we're not going to have any mold or algae, because nothing's ever going to be getting absorbed into the tiles. That's going to be the biggest thing there, which is a benefit, especially for a lot of HOAs or commercials, or, just larger buildings, that people may be walking by. Even theme parks, they're going to want to make sure that everything looks nice and clean and, aesthetically pleasing. Well, they're going to be able to know that you don't have any of that. It's not going to get, that black, kind of brownish kind of staining look to it. Yeah. It's going to stay, whatever color it is. So that's why, like Washington, if you get that, that's what it's going to be like. Even pollen season, this is a pretty dark slate profile.
Sure.
We have even darker, like an onyx, which is basically pure black. When it comes to pollen season, I mean, my car, everybody's car, your house, it's all, green or yellow. Everything just looks like a fairy, just kind of sprinkled dust everywhere. You don't have any of that. The rain, or let's say you want to do a soft wash, or a storm comes by, it's going to wash the pollen off. It's not going to stick, and it's not going to stain, those tiles. And even our white too. White's a pretty big deal for a lot of people. We have a standard, or a premium color, I should say, that would be white. And if anybody does a white concrete or clay, mainly concrete house now, in 5, 6, 7 months, maybe even a year,
I don't know
ends
why
up,
you do that.
it turns gray, right? So it's not, the pure white. It looks great the day it's installed. Well, the biggest thing with the Brava white, it's going to be white, for the 50 years. So it's going to look, exactly how it was the day that it was installed. So
yeah, no, that makes sense, because as you started to explain, I was like, oh yeah, concrete's porous, like it's going to absorb water or any type of moisture or whatever gets up there. So no, I just think that's a really cool aspect of it. And then, I mean, one thing like I don't want to shy away from is, like, Brava's obviously going to be more of an investment compared to like your concrete tile, for example. I know clay tile's probably more in almost every scenario. I guess it depends on the situation. But
always depends on the manufacturer, the quality of the product.
True.
There's certain tiers in terms of concrete and clay tiles. Some are going to be cheaper, some are going to be more expensive. So it just depends.
But considering that, homeowners, property owners, whether it's commercial or multifamily, like, they want to be smart with their money and make a good investment, not only just because it looks good and that they're going to be protected, but where does Brava start to make sense as an investment, like where they'll get that return as far as like energy savings and, maybe not having to replace the tile
Yeah, so there's a couple of different avenues. I mean, when it comes to slate and concrete, like for example, I mean, the slate, you can even put cedar in there, really. I mean, nobody really installs cedar down here in Florida anymore. There's not that many insurance carriers that want to cover it. You don't get that long of a lifespan. So the fact that our cedar shake looks almost exactly like real cedar shake because of the sand casting molds and the compression molding, people are honestly, going more towards a composite. It doesn't even have to be Brava specifically, but just a composite in general. And then when it comes to the slate and the concrete, it's really just the waste. You have some of the tiles breaking. That's going to add, repairs in terms of costs. For the concrete and clay, you're going to have the mortar. You got to address that every so often. And then you already touched on the no maintenance, in terms of the cleaning. So that's going to be another one. And then really on top of that, it's more so the heating and cooling costs. So a lot of customers or homeowners will actually see a reduction in their heating and cooling costs, similar, to like a metal roof, for example. And that's just going to be the Bravo alone. You can add a lot of other things in the roof system that you guys, offer to the homeowners in terms of some sort of reflective, fire rated barrier or, solar attic breeze fans, things that you can upgrade the roof system, which will help the whole system and the roof itself bring down those heating and cooling costs. But then also the insurance premium discounts. That's going to be a big one.
Yeah.
We already touched on the class 4 impact, the wind uplift rating whenever they run that wind mitigation report. And then some will recognize the fact that it is a renewable product, the fact that we are 85% recycled plastics. They'll look at that as an additional benefit as well. And then depending on if they do a class A installation in terms of the roof system or class C. So those are kind of really like the 4 usual things or talking points that a homeowner typically talks to their insurance carrier about that ends up getting them some insurance premium discounts. And I always like to crack the joke, like girl math, I'm sure you're familiar with
Yeah.
it. So some people get to save now and maybe you spend it elsewhere later, but I always tell people you're going to save this now, essentially, so to speak, it's going to pay for itself. It may take, maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 years, which is, pretty good of investment on that.
Math.
And yeah, and then you get to put it in your bank account, hopefully, but for
over
some
time.
of us, over time, essentially. So.
Got it. And do you guys have any case studies? I know you don't I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable because every home or property is different depending on the size and the location of what their energy bill was. But do you guys have any case studies of how much people have saved, whether it's 30-40% a month or?
Yeah, so we've had a couple homeowners. Typically we see just with the Brava alone, if they're just going to do the Brava, you're going to be somewhere around 20, 25, maybe 30% if you're just installing the Brava. When you're kind of doing all, checking all the boxes on the list in terms of the Brava, a high temp underlayment that's super, high quality, a reflected, fire barrier, making it class A, and then also the solar attic breeze fans, you're getting around to almost 40, 45, maybe even 50%. So, I mean, you're at least going to be seeing something, whether it's from 20, to maybe 40, maybe 50%. It really just depends on the different components that you're adding into the system. But at least for certain, if you get the Brava, you're going to get something back in terms of, that smaller quarter of a percentage, you could say.
Got it. Yeah, I just find that very interesting. Over time, how much you save, especially if they're upgrading from something like even shingles or a concrete tile and stuff like that. But I mean, I guess I'll just put you on the spot here. So you guys aren't the only synthetic roofing material on the market. There's Da Vinci. I think I saw EcoStar. I don't know anything about them, but so if a homeowner or property owner was putting you on the spot, why Brava? Why would they choose Brava over some of these other materials without causing too much controversy for you? But
no, I mean, and listen, I mean, when it comes to the composite, in terms of the industry as a whole, in terms of all the manufacturers, you really honestly can't go wrong. I mean, composites in general are going to be, a better option depending on what that homeowner may have on their roof. But it's really more so just making sure the homeowner understands those differences. When it comes to our manufacturing process versus some of the other composites, we're going to be that compression molded. We typically see, a lot less issues in terms of quality control, whether it's the fading or the tile becoming brittle, things of that nature. The compression molding helps that because we're not liquefying the plastics. When it comes to the injection molded, it's a little bit faster of a process, but it almost comes down into the ballpoint size of a pen is what the material is being injected through, and you're melting the plastics at that point. That would be the biggest, kind of differential there. And then also the coloring, a lot of other composites may be using those dyes, whereas with us, we're using those mineral pigments. So, it gives us that flexibility to have the color blends like this, or if we want to do a solid color, we can do that. But the mineral pigments tend to have more resistance to fading. Whereas those dyes, thinking of like a magazine or a picture, at some point, you put that outside, it tends to fade a little bit,
Yep.
loses its vibrancy or its color. So really it's those two kind of differences. And then just, the authenticity of it. It's with us, we're sandcasted molds for the slate and the shake. So we actually took real slate and real cedar and actually sandcasted it, almost like you go to like a dentist, right? And they do like, the molds for you when
Yep.
maybe you're getting Invisalign or something like that. That's essentially what we did with those cedar shake and slates. Whereas the other competitions or the other manufacturers, you could say, so to speak, in terms of injection molding, may be doing the sandcasted molds. So that's essentially a computer, trying to generate a mold to make it look like slate and shake, whereas we took the real slate and shake. So those couple of things, you're probably going to see very similar, heating and cooling costs, probably possibly insurance premium discounts in terms of the wind performances, but you'd have to look up those numbers, be comparing and contrasting to see what those numbers are, just because from my recollection, and I could be completely wrong here, we have a pretty high standard in terms of that wind uplift and that wind durability, so to speak, you could say. I don't think there's that many others out there, and even looking at other products, like standing seam and concrete and clay, where their numbers are a little bit lower or possibly significantly lower than ours. So
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. Just the different dyeing processes and stuff like that. We'll have to schedule time to go out to the factory and check all that stuff out.
yeah, so
But
we always typically like to have people come to the plant tours. I mean, like I said, we have the one in Iowa. If for everyone that lives here, I used to live in the Midwest. Don't recommend going there now because it's pretty cold. I think they just had
Yeah.
a snowstorm up there. But once we have the new plant online, it's a lot closer to our southeast customers or clientele, you could say, so to speak. And we actually have a virtual plant tour that you can do as well. On all of our brochures, there's a QR code, so you can actually walk through the plant tour. It's like 10 to 15 minutes. You can see everything, without actually having to be there. But we always encourage, customers in terms of contractors and supply stores to come, and see the material. You get to, get an in-depth view of what it looks like. You get to meet a lot of the, higher management and, some of our inside sales team that you may be working with. And you get to kind of see how Brava's made. Some people even get to make their own Brava, which is really cool.
that is cool.
Pretty unique. And, we like to keep it pretty personable to, our clientele and customers.
Nice. Okay. So I guess to wrap things up, would you have any other advice to whether it's a residential homeowner or commercial or multifamily property owner? What advice would you give them when, okay, they love the Brava product, they understand all the features and benefits, and they like how it looks, but what advice would you give them as far as choosing the right contractor to install that roof? Or not only just that aspect, but do you have any other advice for them as far as this process?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like the product, I mean, truthfully, I know Brava's not always going to be for everyone. I'd love it, for it to be for everyone, but it's very important to making sure that you're picking a knowledgeable contractor, like, y'all sell in terms of swordsman. At the end of the day, I love everything to go Brava, but having somebody who has the knowledge, knows the industry, things of that nature, being able to make sure that they're offering, the homeowner or that client, the best product, possible in terms of their given situation or their home or what they're looking for. To me, that's what's most important. And, if they're going to go with Brava, that's great. Making sure that they then have a team who's experienced, knows what they're doing on the install, has done the training, knows the ins and outs of our system. That's also going to be important as well. But you got to have somebody that knows all the rest of them, right? Because how are someone, in terms of a contractor, going to be able to give the homeowner their best possible product in terms of what makes sense for them if they don't know about, all of them,
Sure.
So being able to just be familiar with them all, presenting them all within a good standard and making sure that the customer understands what exactly is that they're buying and, what that's going to look like for their future in terms of, possible maintenance, when they're going to have to do a re-roof, things of that nature, and even the workmanship behind it. It's a big deal, right? Being able to have somebody who has a good quality of control, having their site supers or their crew leads and everybody there, making sure the job's going right. And, that's why Swordsman and y'all's team have always been great, working within our contractor program and, working your way up those tiers and being able to offer Brava and like products and others just to making sure that it's right for the homeowner.
Nice. Yeah, I paid him a lot to say that. But,
No, I mean, it's genuinely from the heart. That's something that's super important to me when it comes to contractors that we're looking for, just because even for contractors, Brava's not going to make the most sense for every contractor to offer or install. So,
Sure.
things like that are something that, is meaningful to us, meaningful to our team, because it just shows, those qualities and traits, are going to be reflected throughout the whole buying process, whether Brava's, incorporated with it or not. But, hopefully more Brava than not. But, it just depends on the situations that y'all run into. So.
Absolutely. Well, man, I really thank you for hopping on and sharing all your wealth of knowledge with us. So hope you guys got some value out of this video. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us here at Swordsman Roofing, and we'll see you in the next one.